Hi, everyone. Welcome to our training on all things penalty removal for tax resolution. Probably not only one of my favorite discussions around tax resolution, but also um, prospective clients and taxpayers always wondering, how can I get these penalties removed? So we are going to talk about it today. So let's get into it. So first, what is it? What is penalty abatement? So just to give a little bit of background, when you owe the IRS back taxes, until you pay that balance off, the IRS is charging you penalties and interest. We're specifically talking about penalties in this case, and the penalties that you can face are going to be if you filed your tax return late. There is a late filing penalty, right? So we all know the tax deadline for personal tax returns is typically on or around April 15th. If you do not file the return by April 15th and you have not done an extension, which gives you, 6 more months to file, you will be charged a penalty for late filing. And it depends on how late you filed, right? So as the time goes on, that fee or that penalty gets larger. Then there's a late payment fee. So at the time that the payments, or excuse me, at the time of the tax deadline, so again, on around April 15th, if you owe, just because you filed the return, you also have to make sure that you've paid by that date. Okay, because the payment is also due on that date. Again, if you did an extension, the extension does not stop you from still owing your taxes and your payments by April 15th. So even if you do an extension to file later, you still want to make sure that you've done your best to estimate how much you owe and you have made that payment by April 15th. If not, you are going to be hit with a late payment fee. And then underpayment penalty. So this is where potentially you just haven't paid enough of your tax bill throughout the year. So the IRS requires typically about 90% of your full tax bill be paid by the deadline, April 15th. So let's just to use some very easy numbers, right? If your total tax bill for the year is $10, the IRS says, Tiffany, you have to pay us $9 throughout the year up through April 15th of the next year. Tiffany, if you paid us $7 and not the full 10, we are going to charge you an underpayment penalty for not giving us $9 through the year. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So it's a calculation that they use, and really the reason that they use kind of that 90% is because ultimately taxes are funding, right, government programming. So they want to make sure that they have enough to do that throughout the year and not getting all of their funding, at the end of the year. High level, high level definition and explanation. But anyway, these are the kind of main types of penalties. So what does penalty abatement do? It removes those penalties to help you reduce your overall bill, right? And a lot of times I've seen this where maybe you owed $2,500, but because of all of these penalties and charges and interest stacking up, that $2,500 turned into $7,500 really fast. So it is an opportunity to try to bring back down that tax bill by removing those penalties. So what are the three main types of penalty removal? So we're going to go through all of them. So the easiest one to get removed is going to be your first time penalty abatement. So this is for those who have a clean tax history, meaning you have submitted all your tax returns on time. Nothing has been late. This is the easiest tax penalty to get removed because you can pretty much call up the IRS and request a first time penalty abatement, and they will see, the penalties that are eligible for that. Easiest one because they're just looking at your filing history. Easy breezy. The second one, a little bit harder. Reasonable cause. So this is if you had a legitimate hardship that stopped you from paying your tax bill at that time, whether it's a medical issue that happened, if it was a hardship, I lost my job during that time and I didn't have the financial means to pay. This is, there has to be a reason attached to why you did not pay the tax bill at the time it was due. So in this case, you do have to show kind of what was going on. There needs to be support along with that reasonable cause. And what happens is that reasonable cause petition goes to the IRS for review, and they will make a decision around, do they want to remove those penalties for you. This one takes a little bit more time, right? Because now it's going through kind of this chain of review, and it may get approved, it may not get approved. So that one, again, is a little bit of a higher hurdle to get those penalties removed if it's a reasonable cause scenario. The final one, and this is pretty rare, right? Of course, it's rare. The IRS never makes mistakes, right? This is a statutory exception abatement. So if the IRS has made an error, they will obviously remove it. If you bring it to their attention, they will review the penalties associated with the error and remove them. Okay. So those are your three: first time penalty, reasonable cause, and then a statutory exception. So who qualifies? And this is kind of what I was talking about on the previous page there. So the first one, first time penalty, is if you filed on time, right? If you filed on time every year, you likely qualify for a first time penalty abatement. Again, if you've had a medical, financial, or disaster related hardship, that's where the reasonable cause penalty abatement can come into play. And then finally, if the IRS has wrongfully charged penalties, then that would be removed. So a good example, I had a client a couple of years ago who had gotten married during a tax year. So her and the spouse filed jointly, but the IRS still, for some reason, had on file that she should have been filing single, and they had said, oh, you didn't file your tax return. So they had like racked up all of these penalties waiting for a single filer tax return, but her and her spouse had already filed the joint return. So in that case, we showed, hey, IRS, you already got my tax return. I'm married. We filed jointly. So they, of course, removed all of the penalties and charges and everything on her account, because they were wrong. They didn't realize that she had gotten married and had already filed the return. So just an example of that third penalty option there. So how to apply for penalty abatement. So there is a form you would submit, which is Form 843. And the biggest thing is you have to provide supporting document. And this is going to be along the lines of the second two, right? The first time penalty abatement, there's typically no like forms and things. You just have to call and I guess wait the hours on the phone to speak with a rep that can help you with that. But for the other two, reasonable cause and then a statutory exception, you do have to file tax form 843, explaining the situation, what you're applying for, providing supporting documents, whether that's medical records during that time that the tax return was due, the proof of hardship, you were out of work during that time, and a very strong explanation letter around the situation and what you're doing now so that you don't end up in that situation again, or just showing your tax compliance history since that time. So like a really strong evidence is, okay, yes, in 2020, I had some medical issues, right? Or in 2022, I was let go and I was out of work for 8 months. But now I am back, working, and, I don't have those medical issues anymore. And I have been filing my returns on time and paying my bills on time to the IRS since that point. Like that's the type of story, that needs to be told of here's what happened and here's what I'm doing now so that I am not in that situation again. So would you please, IRS, remove those penalties? Okay. So that's really that process. And like I said, that takes some time, right? Because you submit that and then it has to go through the proper review chains. So expect, a couple of months before you hear back on that, on that petition. So common mistakes, right? Again, with penalty abatement other than first time abatement, if you don't have proof of the hardship, if you're applying for the wrong things or you're missing the deadlines, it's going to be a no, right? Negative, where it's going to be highly unlikely that the IRS is going to approve you for these removal of penalties. So you've got to do the work and make sure that you have the entire tax package, everything in order, to submit to the IRS to avoid delays or just a flat out rejection. So next steps, right? So figuring all of this out. So you do need to review your IRS transcripts for penalties, specifically penalties. You've got to go through your account transcripts, your tax return transcripts from the IRS. You got a breakdown of the balance you owe, how much is related to penalties, in what years it's related, because that's all going to lead into the supporting documents that you need to gather. And then, of course, submit the form ASAP. Tax resolution time is of the essence. This is not something that we can, pick up in a couple years to figure it out. No, you need to figure it out now, because it does have extreme consequences when you don't, right? We never want the IRS to take charge of this effort. Okay. You want to work with them, because if they take over, they're just going to either, one, take the money out of your bank account. They're going to, two, reach out to your employer and have your employer garnish you, or they're going to, add a lien onto some property or something that you owe. We don't want that to happen. So you have to take, charge of this effort and get started immediately. There's always the do-it-yourself option. There's also done with you, done for you options. That's where I come in. I do this every single day for clients. We work together to resolve tax debt. So if that is something that you're interested in, please reach out to me. I would absolutely love to learn a little bit more about what's going on and see if it's a good fit for us to work together to help you resolve this debt, get those penalties removed as soon as possible. So with that, thank you so much for listening. And I hope you've learned a little bit more about penalties, how they can get removed, and if you qualify and what that path is going forward. So with that, have a good one.